Morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Incredible turnout for today's entrepreneurship speakers. It's really a pleasure to introduce our speaker today. As you all know, all of our speakers so far, I think we've had about 16, have been entrepreneurs or people in the innovation entrepreneurship ecosystem, FDA, et cetera, like from the outside. This is the first time we're having sort of an inside speaker, now an inside, but Elliot Reed just arrived at the University of Oregon. I'm really grateful because he's incredibly busy. As you all know, when you're moving, it's tough. He said the place he's been in Eugene the most so far is the garbage and recycling center. Lots of cardboard being taken over there. It's a really nice one, right? Yeah, I mean, we have the best, I think, around. Well, let me tell you a little bit about him. Elliot Reed is an accomplished innovator, entrepreneur, and ecosystem builder with more than 2 decades of experience helping move new ideas from the lab to the marketplace. He, as I said, joined the University of Oregon as the Innovation Partners Director within the Industry Innovation and Translation team, where he's helping to advance our collective mission to turn research into real-world impact. Elliot's career has spanned the full spectrum of innovation and entrepreneurship. He's the co-founder and CEO of Sensate Biosystems, a medical device startup developing wearable biosensor technology. He's launched and led 9 startup companies across fields ranging from medical technology to consumer products, and has raised more than $60 million in funding from grants, venture capital, and philanthropic sources for those startups. His work has led to multiple regulatory approvals and commercial launches, a testament to his ability to navigate the complex path from invention to product. But Elliot's contributions really go beyond just founding companies. He's helped shape innovation cultures within universities, which is part of what he'll be doing here. Most notably during his time at Northeast Ohio Medical University, where he served as Executive Director for Innovation and built programs that supported faculty startups, expanded IP portfolios, and fostered new translational research initiatives. He's also mentored dozens of faculty and student entrepreneurs, and that's one of the things I know he's excited about doing here, and continues to support early stage ventures through his work with investment funds and national commercialization programs. Elliot brings to U of O a wealth of experience in tech transfer, venture creation, strategic partner building, and more. Today he's going to share his expertise in his talk, Disruption Decoded, Transforming Breakthrough Technologies into Market-Ready Ventures. So I'm very happy you're here, Elliot, and thanks so much for joining this morning.
Thank you. No problem. How are we on the mic? Are you guys able to hear me okay? All right. Thanks, Bob, for that really wonderful introduction. It saves me some time in the presentation for having to go over, my background. So my name is Elliot Reed. I guess I should say my full name is Elliot Stewart Reed. I'm not sure if I have 3 first names, 3 middle names, or 3 last names, right? I'm quite convinced, though, when I was born, my mom saw me and was like, there is no way this guy's going to make it in sports. We need to give him like the most professional sounding name possible. So that's what I like to say. I was named after a law firm, so Elliot Stewart and Reed, but I keep the ampersand silent there. I did become an attorney, so I guess it was baked in from the beginning there, but that's not why I'm here today. I am very passionate about how do we take these ideas that you guys are generating, this brilliant science, and translate that and bring it to market. Some of the experience that Bob mentioned, right, over the 20 years in commercialization, particularly within healthcare and medical technologies. I do have my law degree and my MBA. My MBA was focused in bioscience entrepreneurship, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The different startups that are there, but more importantly with my life, the reason that I'm here in Eugene is primarily 2 reasons. So my family, my little daughter Ella, who's 19 months now, I wanted to raise her in this wonderful environment. And truly, one of the key decisions to come out here was the excitement around what Knight Campus is doing. This is a revolution on a campus that I've not seen before. There's a lot of tremendous opportunity and excitement here to go through and have the ambition of doubling your research expenditures within 5 years. To have the talent that you're recruiting in, I mean, there's something in the air here that's unique, and that's something I want to be part of and help to shape that, and as we transfer some of these technologies into the marketplace. So, as we start, I want to say, I'm not here presenting today, I'm here today not in a white coat or in my clinical duties, even though I was originally planning to go to medical school. I thought at the time, I saw our healthcare system through an analogy that I'd like to share with you. We see people falling in the river, and we go through tremendous effort to pull them out of the river. And we do a good job pulling people out of the river, and we pat each other on the back and feel good about it when we do that. But then we turn around, there's another person in the river. We turn around again, there's another person in the river. We keep pulling people out, but we weren't thinking about why are people falling into the river. And that was my passion early on, is how do we prevent people from falling into the river to prevent this? And at the time, I thought that it was health policy. I thought this is the way that we go and look at population scale healthcare instead of individual outcomes. Looking at the successes within great public health campaigns, fluorination in water. I guess that's something I need to learn about here in Oregon. It's a little bit different, right? But tremendous public health initiative, right, where we've reduced tooth decay by over 25%. I think from $1 spent, fluorination in water is about a 30-to-1 return on investment for every dollar spent in this protective policy that's there. The second was how we went through and eradicated smallpox with smallpox vaccinations. I mean, smallpox has over a 30% lethality, and to have a worldwide campaign to eliminate smallpox has been absolutely amazing. And again, another recent setback. We're starting to see more and more smallpox with some of these initiatives, so it gets a little scary for me, but that was something that was truly impactful. Looking at the national efforts to focus on blood pressure as a public health campaign, single-handedly reduced, I think, stroke by over 80% by just promoting and educating how people need to be concerned about blood pressure, how people need to be made aware about blood pressure and why it matters. So I thought this was the answer, right? That we could help people from falling in the river through health policy. And so what do I need to do good at health policy? Well, I need to pursue a JD and an MD degree. At the time, Case Western Reserve University had the #1 health law program and a pretty respectable medical school, and I felt this was the best place for me to go and truly understand what it takes to think about these population scale impacts. Unfortunately, right, when you start off in law school, I like to say it makes you cynical very, very quickly, right? And what I realized is that health policy moves at a glacial speed, right? We're looking at bending the arc of healthcare within 30 years. Right? We're looking at decades before we see meaningful impacts in the policies that we put in place. But what we could do through innovation and entrepreneurship, we can see in real time. And I was very blessed and fortunate, and it was serendipity, that while I was starting my program off, my first year of law school, the university launched an MBA program that was focused in bioscience entrepreneurship. And that was it for me, right? I realized right away that this is where I wanted to make an impact. I wanted to go through and show how we can take early disruptive technologies, push them into the marketplace, improve healthcare for everybody and scale, right? My passion hasn't stopped professionally. While I have 20 years of experience, I was at a fortunate enough place in my life where I wanted to continue to learn and give back. And what I've learned throughout this process of taking these technologies to market and continue my education now through a PhD program. I'm at the end of my program. I'm at Erasmus University in the Netherlands. My PhD is in strategic management and entrepreneurship, really focused on better understanding the mechanisms that allow knowledge to successfully transfer out of the research environment and into the market. Right? This is what I am completely passionate about. And I believe that we may not have an actual recipe, but I certainly want to understand what the ingredients are. What is it to give us the best chance to make sure these phenomenal ideas, the brilliant research in your labs, have a chance to truly make that impact? And so throughout this conversation, I think this is the preview of what I'll be talking about today. We see great innovations that are focused on improving technical capabilities, maybe engineering and optimizing to certain specific requirements, but we may not be looking at it from the right perspective, right? And so I think sometimes we look at this from as using the wrong tool for the job. And that's because typically this is like a technology push where you have these kind of great innovations, and we said, now what's the best place to this could impact it? We have this great technology and capability, where can it be applied? But we need to think about it as researchers and future innovators as how do we then look at it from a market pull perspective, where we're actually looking at it from solving customer demands and pain points, not trying to innovate around something that's just advancing capabilities. And so I started my career off, I think, at a really unique opportunity and a chance for me to learn some of these key concepts personally firsthand with truly innovative and groundbreaking research at Los Alamos National Laboratory. And I'd like to just share one particular story. As a young MBA, we think we can change the world, and we're so excited to go out there, and I get to meet with all these brilliant scientists. and I get presented this technology. While I'm there, my job was to scout the lab, find interesting innovations, and then try to find commercial applications for them, where we can then say, your tax-paying dollars funded this, let's see the benefit to society with it, right? And so I remember this one particular case. We had these new breakthrough in quantum dots, and I think those in the space know Los Alamos had a pretty profound history within the quantum dot world. And the particular properties of these quantum dots, it was something that it was making things like olophobic and not being able to, the paints and the other things to sit into different materials. And I said, oh, we can just change the world. We can just put this into paint for graffiti prevention, right? So if we had quantum dot paint, right, we can just wipe the graffiti off with a rag. Right? And I felt like so proud of myself. And it was one thing where I was saying, my gosh, like this could really be something huge. And then it took a little bit of time before someone said, well, Elliot, how much is that going to cost? Right? Like, is the problem that we need better ways to remove graffiti, or is the problem we need to have cheaper and more effective graffiti removal? Right? And so I was optimizing for the best way to prevent graffiti, where the market was saying, no, what we really want is just to do this affordably. Right? I'm not going to pay $10,000 for a gallon of paint for a wall. Right? But I had to go through that experience and understand it, that there's dynamics in a marketplace that drive innovation adoption that we sometimes don't give account to early on as we start to create and innovate. And we need to be mindful about what those lessons are. And so throughout this presentation, I will provide a set of kind of the life lessons I picked up along the way. A lot of these are going to come from the examples of things that I've, expensive learning curves, right, that I learned throughout the way that I think will help in the future if you follow these lessons to kind of avoid the painful lessons that I had along the way here. So the prime example about why technology, the best technology doesn't always win, we can see this with the VHS and Betamax, right? This is kind of, every business school I think teaches this case. This was a standards war. We had two abilities to go out there and record your own videos on TV. It was transformational at the time. Betamax was the better technical solution. Hands down, everyone agrees it had better capability, better film fidelity, better quality, right? It didn't get adopted. One of the primary reasons that it didn't get adopted is it could only record an hour, right? It was more expensive and only could record an hour of television, whereas VHS could record 2 hours, right? And it was a little cheaper, easier to adopt. And when we look at this right here, I think this is a prime example of where we see engineers, right? They optimize, right, around things that they can measure. Whereas the customers are saying, well, I don't really care about that quality. I'd rather record longer. I'd rather have more of my memories. I'd rather have more of my TV shows that I can look back upon. And so customers are going to inherently optimize for experience, right? Different than engineers. And so one of the key insights here is as you start to think about where your technology is going to be placed and where it's going to disrupt, understanding what is it that the jobs need to be done. There's a whole school of thinking, Clay Christensen at Harvard around the jobs to be done theory. And I really encourage you guys to look it up to understand each customer has requirements that they're looking for. Each customer is looking for a solution to have a particular job to be performed by that technology. Understand that point more than just the actual technical capabilities that are coming. I want to, at this point, kind of transition into, I think, the next part is understanding where we place and launch the technology at the right time, right? So even finding the right technology, the right market fit, it still may be not successfully adopted because of just the timing dynamics around it. The first startup company I had was Vasilux Microsystems. This was a complete technology push, right? We had great technology. We had hyperspectral mid-infrared imaging. We could go through and analyze a number of different tissues, but what could we do with it? We originally started the company, and we got funded pretty heavily to go after coronary plaque assessment. At the time, it wasn't understood. We had coronary plaques that would be vulnerable and likely to rupture, and that would create the downstream effects. We had plaques that were particularly stable and didn't need to be kind of interfered with. So the cardiologists were telling us, if you can help us determine which plaques we need to stent and which ones we can't stent because we're going to disrupt it and cause a bigger issue, that would be meaningful and impactful for us. However, we started to go through this pathway. At that same time, we started to see a tremendous amount of increase in therapeutics around the statins, around the cholesterol-lowering medications, around treated drug-coated stents. And we were very lucky to have a key opinion leader on our advisory board. We had the former CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Fred Loop, who was a renowned cardiothoracic surgeon, who said, guys, I think you're really kind of going into the wrong market, right? This is declining. This technology is so good, why don't we see if there's a better transition for it. It was tough to hear that, but we did what everyone in here has heard. We did the pivot, and we were able to successfully pivot. We found orthopedic surgeons had a tremendous need to assess cartilage quality. We heard from orthopedic surgeons all over the world that orthopedic surgery is barbaric, right? We're going to be changing orthopedic surgery with cell implants. New cell therapies will be here to regenerate cartilage, and that's going to be, what we want. But we don't know how to determine where the healthy cartilage is versus the diseased cartilage. And so we were able to go through and create an arthroscopic probe, which you see on the left. It could go into the joint. It can go in contact with the cartilage. We can then determine from the spectra, the fingerprint, we could index that to the histology and know with the same exact accuracy of what a histologist would rate the cartilage quality. We could give that to the surgeons in real time so they could know where to truly resect for healthy margins. We saw this as something, it was like the perfect time at the perfect wave. The new cell therapies were coming in. We'll be the gatekeeper for this particular innovation, right? We'll be able to determine the newly regenerated therapies, right? The quality of the cartilage they regenerate. We'll be able to help kind of be the gatekeeper on the procedure side. Unfortunately, even when you finally make that pivot, right, that wave never came, right? In 2005, cell therapies will be here in 5 years. It just kept going on, 2010, 2015. We're still waiting for those cell therapies, right? I've been waiting the same amount of time for hair regeneration, right? I finally gave up, right? It just comes a point in time where, that wave is just never going to make it. And this is the most painful lesson, is where we see these truly disruptive technologies that have a chance to do tremendous good, find the right market, find the right pain point, but that market timing still is off, right? So how do we make sure that we align market timing to best hit the technologies that we're promoting? Now, the next story I want to showcase here is this one was the most shocking to me. And maybe I'm just too idealistic and naive in the world, but I truly thought if we had the best solution towards the best market, that it would be, everyone would want it, right? And that it would be welcome within that community. And this particular case was at a company I was running called Clear Image Technology. And what we did at Clear Image Technology was revolutionize orthopedic care. We developed the very first, and I think the only, in-office arthroscopy system. This could be done under a local anesthetic. It didn't require a procedure room. We could actually have the patients fully alert to see the disease condition, to understand what's causing the pain. But more importantly for surgeons, it allowed them to know and plan and say, this is going to be a total joint replacement or this is going to be a partial knee replacement. We had a 1 millimeter single-use disposable scope. We had everything kind of lined up for this. We actually had Medicare, that said, we love what you're doing. We actually want to increase your reimbursement. And so during that process, right, we're like, wow, this is fantastic. It goes to committee, and the particular committee is called the RUC, the Relative Value Uptake Committee. And what I realized in that process is that there are saboteurs that are out there in every single field that you're innovating and disrupting in. We need to understand when you win, what are you displacing and what does that mean, right? In this case here, in this committee of other orthopedic specialists, we thought these were all of our champions, right? There was a foot and ankle doc that said, no, I think this is unsafe, right? Once you're able to do in-office arthroscopy, generalists can do in-office arthroscopy, right? That can create, these safety complications. We had 1,000 cases showing that we had no safety issues. We had no adverse events. But we couldn't overcome that obstacle, right? That they said, unless you completely restrict what your device can do and who you can sell to, the fact that a generalist could be looking at this and create harm because they don't know what they're doing makes it inherently unsafe. Right? It didn't kill the idea, right? But it did actually set us back to the point where we couldn't be successful with the reimbursement that we were at. And this is something that was really it was really tough for me to understand because it was short-sighted of this foot and ankle doc. Instead of saying these sports med docs can be our referring partners, they can drive revenue to us, so we just stick to the high-value procedures. They wanted to protect their guild. They wanted to, the big real issue is they did not want to lose the revenue of doing that procedure in their own clinical setting, right? That was what we ended up learning at the back end of this. It was protecting their guild, protecting their revenue source so that others couldn't get into it. Another area where I think this is even more painful, right? So here, on one of the companies I was mentoring as an entrepreneur in residence, new wound therapy dressing. Tremendous outcomes for chronic wounds, particularly with diabetic foot ulcers. FDA cleared, their key opinion leaders love it. hospitals are buying it, right? Okay, hospitals are buying it, but we're not seeing any uptake. What's going on? I went through and we mapped out the entire workflow. We actually spent a full day sitting inside a trauma center with a wound care clinic and followed from the patients when they checked in all the way through to when the bill finally left to go out to insurance. We went through every single department, everyone's desk related to this. And what we found out quite early is that this particular company wanted to innovate around kind of this new unique procedure kit, right? We had everything there convenient for the doctor. All the design engineers went through and said, oh, this is easier for them to grab this. It's easier for them to see this and do this. It simplified the procedure. Everything that a human factors project would say you need to optimize for, right? But in doing so, it created a unique package. It didn't fit into the surgical racks, right? When the nurses went through to pick for the cart for that they're going to do for their procedures, right, it stood out. It wasn't something they were used to, and so the nurses just weren't picking for the cart. And we didn't understand the role of the surgical nurse in driving true clinical adoption and success. This is one where I look at it as kind of a workflow sabotage, right? That we had no way of knowing that. We did everything right on the front end, but things just were still too different and disrupted one particular person's workflow in a way that was just unfortunately harmful to the company. And so we truly see in this lesson, right, that the innovation dies from a lot of different ways, but these operational friction that you create, right, can often lead to the failure for these technologies to adopt. It has nothing to do with the technological solution. It's these inherent mechanisms that are support and surround the adoption of that technology. And so the workflow disruption, I think, I've seen it so many times. And myself, I've been an instructor for the I-Corps program for medical technology companies. I've mentored a number of different students and faculty members going through. This is an area, particularly in healthcare innovation, that few people, I think, understand the impact of what you're doing to the workflow matters the most, more so than in anywhere else, right? People don't like to change what they're used to doing. And when you introduce something new and tell them they have to do something that they've been doing differently, it creates internal friction and resistance. One area here, all across every healthcare hospital system, everyone is trying to avoid these hospital-acquired infections. I have these here listed as CLABSIs. It's a central line acquired bloodstream infection. This is like a central catheter that goes in. It gets contaminated for a number of different reasons. One of the main reasons that is it relates to how the actual medications get delivered into the central line, right? The port that's being used there. And it's a really simple fix. If nurses just spent 30 seconds with a single alcohol swab and wiped it down for 30 seconds, it would practically eliminate these infections, right? And these infections aren't trivial. I mean, it leads to almost 30,000 deaths per year, and every hospital is driven on metrics to optimize and reduce these acquired infections. So 3M came out and said, well, great, right? We invented something really simple, but it's a huge breakthrough. It's a screw cap that goes on the end of the injection port, and it's just a sponge with alcohol inside of it. And so while it's secure on there, it's sterilizing things. When you take it off, you can then go through and put your injections in right away. It frees up that 30-second requirement for the nurses. And it works, I mean, tremendously, right? So when they use these caps, all infections reduced by about 75%. But what happens is that it's not consistently used, right? And it's because of this unique thing. If you were to go through and investigate this, I had one of my client companies as an entrepreneur in resident was a physician operating room doc who wanted to solve a similar problem. We walked the entire procedure. The nurses would keep these caps kind of in their pocket. They would forget to use them. They would run out of them. And so then 3M said, okay, well, let's put them on a strip, right? Let's optimize for that. And it's still something that if it's not mandated by the hospital, right, the nurses stop doing it, right? You can't change that behavior. Even though they all know it, they all learn it, they don't want to create harm, it just is too much of a disruption to their process of treating lots of patients. So you see this, right? Once the hospital focuses on it and says, we want to go through and reduce these infections drop 95%, right? The hospital loses focus, right? The things are good, bad habits pick back up, and we see these infection rates pick right up alongside of it. This is an example of how I actually go through and map these workflows. This is something that I would encourage everyone innovating in healthcare to truly map out and diagram and document everything related to the procedure and how it goes through. Knowing where you're disrupting, knowing who's going to be impacted by it, trying to understand what stakeholders need to be on board, because in here is where some of those either process process saboteurs or internal saboteurs can reside. And so it's in mapping this out that you can truly understand, and hopefully prevent, right, the ability of your technology from failing to adopt because of some internal mechanism or some procedure or workflow disruption. But even doing that, right, it's still something that is a tremendous challenge. And even the largest companies get this wrong. Inhalable insulin was supposed to be one of the biggest revolutionary changes in therapeutic delivery, one of the biggest impact to a really vulnerable population of diabetics that have fatigue of getting the constant injections into their daily insulin. So inhalable insulin was going to be a game changer, right? At the time, Pfizer had a co-partnership. I think it was with Lilly. Sanofi, sorry. So they had a partnership with Sanofi when they developed this. Right before the FDA approval came in, Pfizer was like, we're ready to go, right? We believe in this so much, we're going to buy out Sanofi's interest day one before Sanofi could even share on the upside. So paid Sanofi almost $1.5 billion up front. They put in tremendous amount of money building a gigantic sales force. They mapped out the process, right? And this is coming from Ron Adner's The Wide Lens. He talks about this as a case study, and I'd like just to share it with you. Pfizer went through and spoke with 5,000 endocrinologists. It was a drug delivery play. They went through and validated the design on the drug, the design on the device. They went through and mapped the workflow of where it would go through. And this is the workflow as they understood it. They saw areas of concern, these little yellow dots, but everything else, they were like, we're ready to go. Until, right, the new way of doing inhalable insulin, what did Pfizer overlook? Right, what does it take to have inhalable insulin? Your patients have to have healthy lungs, right? That was something that the endocrinologists never, ever evaluate. And now, in order for this to go through, the workflow has been disrupted, right? The endocrinologist needs to make a referral for them to be seen for a pulmonary specialist. You have to do a lung function test. From there, right, the results have to go back to the endocrinologist, who has to somehow review them before they then say that they want to treat the patient with the inhalable insulin. You can see that the outcomes here. This was a complete and total failure of a product launch. Not because it wasn't the best solution, not because it wasn't the best technology, but because it was a workflow disruption, right? This was something there was just no experience. You would lose patients between the endocrinologist and the pulmonologist, and then from the pulmonologist back to the endocrinologist. The compliance rate just dropped off tremendously because of that. So I think this brings us to this other key insight, right? That any time that you're innovating and you're adding additional workflow steps, you're really multiplying all of your adoption challenges in that particular process. How do we think about this? When we do our development as a company, our development as a technology, we try to understand the workflows. I like to think about it through the analogy of like two different rivers, right? The more obstacles you put in, the more turbulence you create for that process, the more challenging and disruptive it is for your technology to actually go through. We want to be over here, right? We want these clear rivers. We want to make sure that we have ways that we're enhancing the existing processes. We're not replacing them. Right? We want to make sure that there's kind of truly the path of least resistance going through for your technology to be adopted. And so if the technology that you're putting out there disrupts the workflow, it's going to face tremendous amounts of resistance regardless of the clinical benefit that's there. And you have to find a way to pivot and then get around that resistance, whether it's through additional education, additional training, additional packaging. It's going to require a lot of back-end work that hopefully you could have avoided if you planned for this on the front end. One of my startup companies right now, we mentioned Sensate Biosystems. It's a wearable biosensor company. I want to bring this case up because an additional area where I see challenge in technology getting adopted is how do your customers made aware of this particular technology? I call it the education burden. Every product has to educate its consumers on why they need it. That's just inherent. You're telling a story as a consumer product, as a medical product, as an industrial product. You have a value proposition that needs to be easily understood by your customers, and that requires educating them. Sensate Biosystems is a spin-out company from a collaboration between Case Western Reserve University and the Air Force Research Laboratory. The Air Force was saying, we want to measure the warfighter for optimal performance. We want to look at a biosensor-based program. And so they went through and said, if we do this, though, we don't want to be the only partners that's funding the development of these technologies. We want to have an inherent commercialization effort to drive these to market if we do see things that work. a really phenomenal program because we weren't told what we needed to find. It was find relevant biomarkers, right? Once we found relevant biomarkers, it was then find something to do with them. So again, back to this kind of technology push that we talked about earlier. And so on the front end, I've done it a number of times now. I come in and I say, all right, what are the most promising biomarkers that we found in this program? Where can we apply them? And so we mapped this out. We had 3 candidates, neuropeptide Y, we have lactate, and then interleukin-8, IL-8. Within each of these, we thought of different ways that the technology could be presented as a particular case study. With neuropeptide Y, we see this closely associated with mental disorders and depression. We also see it as a signaling hormone related to hunger and satiety. And then we also saw it as ways for pilot fatigue. And we went through and said, in this particular application, if we could help people identify they were going to have a craving before they did, right? We could change their behavior. We could drive diet compliance a lot better with a wearable, right? Let's have a wearable for diet monitoring that could pair with a service like Noom or some other online app-driven weight loss management program. So that was the key insight from neuropeptide Y. Lactate, we said, everyone, we can go after here on the high-performance monitoring for athletes, for pilots. Your body has a metabolic response directly related to its output through lactate, right? We have high-performance monitoring here. Interleukin-8 is associated with a number of key immune responses. Primarily, though, it's kind of a sentinel biomarker for around chronic wound identification as well as pediatric sepsis, ideally, right? And so we mapped these all out and said, we have our 3 candidate opportunities. We have the wearable fitness opportunity, we have our obesity management tool, and we have a pediatric sepsis monitor. Looking at the opportunities here, we really saw tremendous value in pediatric sepsis monitoring. Absolutely. The way that infants, particular, show sepsis is much different than adults. They don't have the telltale physiological signs. And the challenge with sepsis is typically in the NICU, I think something like 30 to 40% of the NICU patients will get sepsis. This is all the environment that they're in. It leads to a lot of infection. If they do get septic, there's like a golden hour, it's called, where if you can catch the sepsis within that hour, right, there's a chance that there's a great chance the baby will recover. If you fail to catch it during that golden hour, this is an area where I think the lethality is close to like 80%, if I remember correctly on that research. But they have no ability to tell, and you can't do what the traditional solution for sepsis is do a blood draw. Well, on a neonate, right, you sometimes have to infuse blood before you can pull blood out. Right, they don't have that supply, and so doing random blood tests on neonates just isn't feasible. Right? So. Again, we did our customer discovery, we spoke with a lot of different NICU nurses, NICU staff, and they all said, well, yeah, if you had like a smart diaper just through the urine, we could measure and identify which ones were trending towards sepsis, right? That would be huge for us. We had discussions with Procter & Gamble on the diaper side to put together a therapeutic diaper for the neonates. We thought this would be the place where we would probably launch, right? But then when we went out, the same thing on the obesity management side, right? This was another one that was like really compelling because every investor we were meeting with said, well, we like this one the best, right? The market's the biggest, right? People are paying tons of money to lose weight, right? If you can truly tell people and signal, hey, we're going to have a craving, let's do a distraction therapy or something to get through it, this would be huge. And one of the areas with these web-based diet programs is they don't have the quantitative data to show their impacts, right? So we were giving the ability for these really successful market segments to be even more successful. And again, I think you see here the total market being considerably higher. I think it's our biggest market opportunity. But we ended up focusing on the wearable fitness monitor, right? For one key reason. When we went out and talked to customers about neuropeptide Y, they're like, neuropeptide what? Right? And I think probably even most in the room have not heard of neuropeptide Y, or at least at any kind of detailed level. And so there's an educational burden that has to go through and say, why do you need to care about neuropeptide Y, right? Why are you going to pay us to know what your neuropeptide Y levels are? That's huge, right? We all see, I think, on the TV commercials, for those that don't watch television, I'm very glad you don't know this. like just within cosmetics, this hyaluronic acid, craze that's out there. I mean, they're essentially clapping it to you so you can remember it, and they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to educate you on why you need that. The lift for neuropeptide Y would be even greater than that, right? For pediatric sepsis, for interleukin-8, we went through and they said, we love it, Elliot, but we're not convinced that it's the sentinel biomarker you think it is. We'd want to see, 5 years, lots of different clinical studies before that came there. And so the clinical burden was going to be enormous. So just in summary there, we chose the path of least resistance for educating the consumer, right? And that's what we're going after right now, is going direct to athletic trainers and coaches for mentoring high-performance athletes. One lesson I really want to make sure that sinks in for this audience in particular is knowing what you're really innovating, what's your true product right now. As researchers here in the community, you think that you're developing drugs, you think you're developing medical devices. I need to change your perspective right now, and I think hopefully you guys will be able to take this in. You're not selling a drug right now. You're not selling a medical device right now, right? You're in the risk mitigation business. You're not in the drug development business. You're not in the device business. Everything that you're doing is inherently risky to an incumbent large firm in the market. For a startup therapeutic company, what you're selling is data, right? You are a data salesperson. Just what your company is doing is creating the best data to make sure a buyer is going to see that data and say, wow, we love it, we want to buy the asset, right? No university startup is going to be launching and going into commercial sales with a therapeutic, right? I mean, I don't want to say that and then someone does it, but please, right? Most likely outcome is you're going to be selling this off to a large incumbent firm because of the data pack that you generate. And so as you're doing your customer discovery with a new therapeutic, you need to be really mindful and say, there's probably 15 drug companies that may be interested in the space that you're in. This is a really easy problem to solve for. Going and talking to them and saying, what kind of data do you want to see? What tox data do you want to see? What dosing data, your drug distribution profile? What is it you want to see before you get interested? And then start to plan your studies, your preclinical workup to generate that specific data pack. On the device side, this one's more challenging, right? I hear a lot of innovators like, well, we have this new device and we want to get acquired. Like, awesome, right? The device companies think about things a little bit differently though, right? They didn't identify the problem that you're trying to solve. So their marketing team didn't help to create that concept. Their engineering team wasn't the team that solved it, right? Your engineering team solved it. Their marketing team wasn't involved in doing the pricing and the rollout, right? That's something that as your device comes out there, they're willing to say, you know what, we can sell, we know how to sell, but you tell us that there's actually a need. And this is something where, within devices, to be truly successful, what you're really selling is that commercial viability, right? You have a device that's been de-risked through the engineering process, all the way through FDA approval, and now you need to show us that doctors are buying it, clinics are using it, and that rate is increasing each month. So you need to understand, I think, from a strategic acquirer perspective, how many cases do they want to see treated with your device before they get excited? What kind of annual growth rate in sales are they looking for before they want to come in and say, we can scale it a lot more? The device companies will pay a tremendous amount premium, right, for having you de-risked all of those particular areas. So for this particular lesson, I really want to think through is to truly understand that technology push to market pull transition. You really need to understand as a startup, you are just a bunch of unique sources of risk. Everything in your development plan needs to be removing individual parts of risk. Investors at different stages will want to see that their dollars are removing the risk needed to actually get you to the next funding milestone. Anything that's not related to your risk shouldn't even be pursued at this point, right? So everything needs to be focused on truly that aspect of risk mitigation in your startup. So I'll go through quickly at the end here as how we talk about things and thinking about transitioning from a technology push to a market pull. Just to recap some of the lessons that we've had here. We have, I think, 6 unique particular lessons and some different key insights for us. Let's make sure that we're solving for the right problem, not the better solution. Right? The market timing means everything on this. Identify your saboteurs, who wins and loses. The innovation will die from these inherent operational friction. Disruption in clinical workflows matter a lot, and education costs a tremendous amount of money to make people want to understand your value proposition and buy your product. So going on to the fun part here, right? What can we do about it? We want to go through and see how do we actually align our efforts. You as researchers can't go through and change your research program, but we can change, I think, how we look about the pain points as you're solving them, right? So identify who's already struggling with the problems that your technology could solve. Try to identify that. Don't say we can do it better, right? It's easier to go through and say, I can solve your pain, not do something better for you. Right? So try to identify who's already got that pain point. Let's let that market pain truly shape your requirements. This is something that I don't think gets categorized well enough on the early stage part. So again, don't change your technology, right? But just refine it. Make sure it lines up with those jobs to be done for the customers. Identify the sources of friction is going to be the next step, right? Identify those saboteurs, understand those workflow conflicts, what it's going to take to educate people. As you're doing your customer discovery, talk to your end users. Ask them, how do they get informed about new innovations? What kind of data do they like to see in that, right? That needs to be built into this from the very early level. We need to have, I think we've all heard this at this point through this educational series and the other opportunities on campus, these kind of beachhead markets. Where's that first real opportunity that can truly take this technology to market in the most efficient way? For that, find that particular area like we did with Sensate, right, where we had 3 really unique, huge markets to play in, being able to be really tactical about why we're doing that and choose that path of least resistance. And you're building for acquisition from day one. You need to understand that at the base level, what we're doing as startups is looking at how we're going to be adding value to be acquired by a strategic. I put together a real simple success pattern equation. I truly believe that commercial success will happen when you have great technology, when you have a market that wants it and is pulling it in, right? And you've been able to identify and reduce those opportunities for friction. But if you miss any element of this brilliant science in your lab will fail to get adopted. I'm going to end my time with us here, just talking about understanding how we scale. How do we scale here on campus, right? And then my role at the University of Oregon in our Innovation Partners Group, what I'm here to do to help you. So making sure, I think, for just kind of this recap for you, we just did that. I'm very much excited to be part of this environment. I'm very excited to be a Duck. My wife is a Buckeye, right? I mean, it's already creating internal friction, but I'm wearing the Oregon shirts, right? Every Friday, I'm committed to wearing Oregon, shirts for my Pride Day. I believe in what we're doing here. It's coming through, and so I want to be a additive force. I want to be a driver for your innovation into the marketplace. I hope you see that I'm bringing a more unique perspective as someone who's been in the battlefield, who's been working with the researchers, who's been on both sides of the deal to know what does it take to truly get the technology ready to be adopted into the market. I want you guys to be continuing to push your breakthrough technologies. Keep promoting ways that we can go through and save lives and push those kind of population impacts that I was talking about earlier. I want to go through and help be that driver, and I really look forward to the discussion we have next. But please, as you start to think through your early discoveries, what we can do on the university side to help protect the intellectual property, how to best support the deal to get it into the industry, that's what we're here for, and that's what I want to make sure I'm doing to be helpful in your effort. So we'll take questions and answers now.
Elliot, that was awesome. I probably should have said this at the beginning for those who are rapidly taking notes. This is going to be recorded, so you can go back and get all those pearls of wisdom. So thank you. We'll have a microphone going around, so if you have questions for Elliot. Do we have one already? Yep. Danielle.
Hi, Elliot.
Danielle.
Great to see you in person.
Yes, absolutely.
And welcome. So I'm really curious to hear your perspective on the current administration and its undercutting of funding that is really driving innovation at the fundamental stage that allows for innovations that will be acquired at some point, right? I feel like the academic enterprise is where research and development is done in this day and age. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that, given what we've seen over the past few months.
Yeah, I mean, it's very saddening to see our country give up one of its, I think, greatest strategic assets was our knowledge creation and drivers of innovation, and how much we've invested in education and research. You hear about these responses from the European Union wants to take our scientists, and they're offering $500 million to recruit scientists. That's a drop in the bucket compared to what we have here. I mean, we do things at scale that other nations cannot even comprehend, even China. The amount that we put into investing in these early stage research efforts through the different government agencies and through philanthropic support is unmatched anywhere in the world. And so it's sad to see us just retreat on something that has driven so much value. Part of my passion in this particular space within really early stage kind of pre-market technologies is how we've responded as a nation to kind of economic or to different crises that are out there. So my background's at Los Alamos National Laboratory. That wasn't accidental, very much intentional, looking at when our country faced one of its most existential threats. We needed to produce a nuclear bomb before the Germans did. And we committed every ounce of dollars available and put the national labs together with that one compelling objective. But we didn't just solve for that, right? We went through and invested in a tremendous amount of engineering and PhD students being minted in the wake of that. The ripple effects are enormous. One of the earliest technologies that Los Alamos spun out of the lab into the market was for nuclear medicine and imaging. They had the particle accelerators and everything, and they were able to then translate those efforts into the lab that way. Another innovation that, and I'm sorry, I'm getting to the point, just setting up the context here. Another innovation that we all use, or most of us use, I'm assuming, that have no idea that it was created out of Los Alamos National Lab is your EasyPass toll, right? Now, Los Alamos didn't say we want to make tolls easier for people, right? Los Alamos said we have bomb components around the base, we need to know where they are. And so they developed RFID for that particular purpose of knowing where each component was that had to be put together. In doing that, someone said, well, I have cattle that don't move much faster than your bomb components, right? I have a wide geographic area. Can we track cattle? The cattle would all go through a gate. You could see in and out. Someone saw cattle to, rail cars isn't that far of a stretch, right? They all go through a gate, and there are now long lines of cattle. And then when you think about it, roads are really just a bunch of different train lines in parallel, right? So the technology adopted and went that way. But what I'm trying to say is that early investment to solve something could never have understood what it was solving in the long term. How many generations of advancement came because of those early fundamental research investments. And we continue to do that at scale through the space program. As we went through, again, another existential worry and threat, being able to then promote this science, and education, and that science is cool, and we want PhDs to go to NASA. And to give that up it breaks my heart. I do think, though, I come to it from a position where we are now, more than ever, how we successfully license our technologies out to the universities matter. The more successful we can be in our office with your technology funds that next cycle. So when the government isn't there for that partner, we have our own war chest to keep funding these particular initiatives. So that's part of why, while it's unfortunate that we're in this scenario, I'm really hopeful that, being smart about things on the licensing, generating the great ideas you guys have, continue to do that, and then how we go and work with industry partners to bring that out helps create that internal cycle for us. I think on the small business side, I've not seen any direct mention of like SBIRs being targeted or not wanting to fund. I've seen that indirectly through just complete cuts of budgets at NIH or NSF that I'm sure will have impacts on the SBIR and STTR grants, which are I think, again, one of the most brilliant things our country's done, and very few other countries do similar things, right? Is to help fund non-dilutively these ideas, to know that there's a valley of death and the government needs to be there to help encourage these new industries and these new innovations. So I'm hopeful that, in this particular environment that, as things get reshuffled, we are dealing with someone who considers themselves the ultimate capitalist. I think that, hopefully the message is there that, let's keep feeding the capitalist mindset and kind of play into that, not in the sense of let's stop the basic research, but being able to say these small business grants need to be there and have vital importance. So yeah, you touched a nerve, and I hope that we get through this quickly.
Excellent presentation, Elliot. And in terms of the nerve that was struck, very much so empathize. My question is kind of towards the maps that you've had to generate.
Yeah.
Both the operational friction, how large of a team do you need to be able to make that map accurate? And is that something to think about in terms of the community that we're building and the people that we need to find, the team that we need to build to do that right?
So I do those myself, right? It's a team of one. I am a statistics nerd. I went and got my Six Sigma black belt from Purdue University, and part of the Six Sigma mindset is to go through and to document everything and to map everything and then look for these process improvements. I think on the business school side, any operations research student at the master's level would be able to go through and with a little bit of training, know how to go through and do that mapping. The challenge with the mapping isn't so much of recording people's time or trying to work the process. It's getting access to the facilities. I think that becomes the bigger issue. For me, being able to do that is because at Northeast Ohio Medical University, we didn't have our own hospital. We were one of the only academic medical centers without a hospital. And so we had 25 partner hospitals that all of our students would do their rotations through. And we had just a very unique asset in that I could call up 25 different hospitals and say, I want to understand how you guys do this, and let's go through and walk it. But it was also, I guess, being in this enough to know where to walk, right? I don't want to just see the doctor do the procedure, right? That was really intentional for me to follow, okay, now who gets it from here after the doctor was done, and how does it go to billing? And then talking to billing, what problems do you see with this? And from there to the claims and the recovery side. And then one key insight that I learned in this effort, I didn't put it on the map, but all of these hospitals are trying to be more efficient with their money and generate as much money as possible. They've all stood up these things called revenue integrity offices. I've never even heard of it. And now there's revenue integrity officers. There's chief revenue integrity officers. And it became really really to understand, from their perspective, they're almost like internal guardians for a lot of innovations, right? And as new technologies come in, the revenue integrity office will have, a technology committee, and I'm drawing a blank. I don't know why. Bob, what's the committee? The internal committees of the hospital that review new technologies before they bring them in. It'll come to me. There's a committee, right? The clinicians will come through, and it needs a champion, right? So one clinician needs to say, I'm going to bring this into the committee for adoption. And when I meet with people, right, I want to say, yeah, you like this technology, but are you willing to take it to the committee and advocate for it, right? Are you willing to stand behind it that way and truly find out who my people are that are, okay, this is kind of cool, versus those that really are passionate about what you're doing. As you do that process, as you start to do your customer discovery in general, leaving just besides the process mapping part out of it, just some key insights, I think. I think it's best to never talk about what your solution is early on, right? You want to truly understand the pain points. No one will tell you you have an ugly baby, right? No one will, right? I've not met that person, right? I met a lot of terrible people, but none, right, that would say that. So when you say, hey, we have this cool thing, what do you think about it? Oh yeah, it's nice, right? And they're going to move on. And so when you are showing your solution and they're like, oh yeah, it's nice. Okay, well, you take it to the committee to advocate for it. Find out truly, do they believe in what you're doing as that partner? But yeah, mapping it out, I mean, that's a day or two, get the stopwatch and trying to, see where things go and, doing those process flows.
I want to ask you about pipeline building. Nick Costa's here somewhere from Launch, Oregon, something we talk about a lot. We want to build the pipeline here as the culture's changing. And simultaneously, I'm reading a book called Nexus, which is about the history of information systems. And I'm at the part of the book where it argues that more information is not necessarily better. And I think one of the examples of that may be that if we really focus on the chances of success and all the barriers, that people may get a little paralyzed and not jump right in, right? So how do you balance that, and what are some strategies that you've used to build pipelines successfully where you've been?
So I have seen a lot of technologies. I've mentored over 300 The state of Ohio funded me to be an entrepreneur in resident for the entire state, focused primarily on medical technologies. And so I've seen things at scale. I've been part of an early stage investment fund that was kind of, at the earliest funder of seed stage you could get to, that would fund the first 25,000 up to the next 500,000. And I've seen probably, I think, 600 or so investment pitches through that fund. One thing I've learned quickly is that I'm personally terrible at picking winners and losers, right? And I think institutions and systems are equally as bad at trying to pick winners and losers. I think the data show like the best hedge fund managers are just more lucky than good on better days. So for me, I think the idea is not to be the gatekeeper on, I don't think this technology has merit, right? I don't think that's truly my decision to make. I've seen a lot of terrible technologies. Be successful. Because this is being recorded, I don't want to share any of those personally, but there's some I'm like, this is a joke. And then next thing you know, they get acquired for, like 100 million. So anyways, it gets frustrating sometimes. But it's because of that insight that in my role as the director of Innovation Partners, I don't want us ever being, the gatekeeper of what technology we want to support or not, because I think the market will decide that quickly enough. You going out and getting fundraising is its own little check. If investors aren't funding your company, that should be telling you something, right? You can keep changing the story, trying to find the pivot, find that beachhead market, can get everything that we went through in this lecture, and it's just still not attractive to people. And so those problems weed themselves out early, I think, on the front end. To truly build a pipeline, this is what my PhD research is very interested in. What are the ingredients for success? What do we need to have? And I'm starting to see us build that here within Eugene. We need to have the ability, to help faculty understand translation, right? And your programs are doing a great job in that regard. We need to have more educational programs that link, the professional students with our, engineering and science researchers, for them to be able to bring talent to think about startups in a unique way. We need to have facilities. Again, you guys are supporting that on the early stage facilities, particularly for life sciences, but we need to have more of it. Capital, Nate's doing a great job in helping to keep and grow and build more capital. I think one of the areas where, if I had to be critical of our situation in Eugene, of what's preventing a larger pipeline, is the talent part of the equation. We're not fortunate enough to have a very large, economic base here where, hey, we have Medtronic in the backyard, and their senior VPs now want to start up, and they can roll in. Or, we had a successful company that was in Eugene that got acquired, and then they looked for their next opportunities in Eugene and started to do it. So I think it truly is that kind of nuclear reaction where once that first goes, it'll separate, and we get those successes here, they'll restay and grow their second and third startups. Mm-hmm. So I think the planning has to be done intentionally to think about not what we're doing just to create an environment for the first startups, but how do we promote those serial entrepreneurs to come back and do startups 2 and 3, right? That's what's truly going to make this region launch. Right.
Good. Question back here.
Elliot, thanks for coming in. Great to hear your background. In some ways, kind of merging the last two questions, I think one of the idiosyncrasies of here is that we actually don't have a medical school, right? So not even kind of close affiliation. I was wondering whether you could comment on that, right? And I could see costs and benefits to that and how we might leverage that to our advantage. Mm-hmm.
I was very surprised. The lack of hospitals in this region just moving here was really startling for me. And I guess I'm spoiled coming from Cleveland where, Cleveland Clinic and others are just massive. And so we have like this hospital wars going on in Cleveland where there's just giant hospitals everywhere. Coming here looking for a pediatrician for Ella, I'm like, oh, wow, where do I take her if things? It was like really a shock. So I did some research into this for the state of Oregon. And, I think with the retiring that's happening, I think the Oregon graduates less physicians per capita than almost every other state. So it seems like there's a need for a second medical school. I would love for that to be back here, right? And so if Bob and his planning can make it happen, I think that's the man right here.
Done.
It is needed, absolutely. But I do want to say you guys are somewhat blessed by not having a hospital here, particularly as it relates to health innovations, because you don't get institutional bias, right? I didn't bring this up enough in the presentation. It's just a talking point. When I meet with early technology, startups that come from the Cleveland Clinic or come from the Mayo Clinic or come from Boston General, they all, oh, this is the solution. Our key opinion leader is the world-class expert in this. Like, okay, that's great. That problem works for him, right? How does the rest of the clinical community treat this particular disease? How do we truly understand it? And so what often happens at large academic medical centers is that they innovate around the unique pain points of their very specialized professionals, right? That see cases that most others don't see. People in regional hospitals and others don't have those resources or access. And so a lot of great innovation I've seen has failed because they followed the advice of a key opinion leader from an unrelatable institution, right? Like this is, how you treat heart failure at the Cleveland Clinic is going to be completely different than how it's treated here. And so, where's most of the customer base going to be? It's not going to be at the Cleveland clinics, right? It's going to be in these larger, community hospitals across the country. So not having that constraint here, I think you guys need to be a little bit more scrappy, develop your own clinical relationships, and getting those access to a wider voice of customer early on, I think helps shape better innovation for you guys.
Well, I think we're about at the end of the hour, so I think we're going to have to suspend it. I know there's more questions. We got some time, maybe in the hallway. We can
absolutely.
do some additional questions. The good news is you're not leaving. You're staying in Eugene, so there'll be lots of time to continue to ask questions. And thanks so much for a great lecture.
Absolutely.